So I work for Microsoft in our global talent acquisition team, or GTA as we call it, and we've gone through quite a big transformation in the last 2.5 years. My role is a talent sourcing manager, right? So I manage a team of talent sources. So in kind of real money, that's kind of like headhunters. We have 2 roles in GTA. We have recruiters and talent sources. So recruiters do like a 360-degree recruiter role, bit of sourcing, managing process end-to-end, managing hiring managers, managing the overall process. Sources primarily just source external talent. So there's no internal kind of movement that they look at. It's purely external sourcing. So we restructured the team a couple of years ago, and I've been there like 4 years now, mainly to answer to some of the kind of criticism that we had, and also some of the changing market factors. There are companies that kind of coming into the market 5-6 years ago that weren't around before. So companies like Amazon, Facebook, you've heard about, and they were kind of sucking up all the best talent, and a lot of people were kind of leaving from Microsoft and going to these organizations. So we needed to kind of look at how we did talent acquisition differently. So if I was to kind of summarize how we were, 2.5 years ago, we were massively reactive. So we just hired the best people that kind of came to us, and we were really lucky. I mean, we could still fill all of our roles with people who apply. But someone asked me at lunchtime, well, what's the hardest thing about working at Microsoft and recruiting in Microsoft? And I think the undertone was, must be quite easy, right, working at Microsoft recruiting. And to Dan's point, the bar for talent in these kind of companies, and in fact most companies, is incredibly high. So, and we just frankly weren't geared up to hire the best in the market. We hired the best of people that kind of came to us. So we restructured our team, and we kind of put in place these 5 kind of strategic pillars, which I'll talk a bit about, because it's kind of relevant to the sourcing team and relevant to data. So the first one's external focus. So we had 75% or more of our kind of leadership roles were kind of moving around internally at that time. So whilst that's great on one perspective, it does mean that we're not kind of pollinating with some new, fresh, external kind of perspectives. And we were very kind of insular in terms of our talent. So managers, and some of them still do, by the way, we had a very kind of big preference for hiring internals that we knew, had a track record, we had performance history data on them, and we're kind of like, well, this is much quicker, so let's hire internally. So we were moving a lot of people around. So we kind of said, well, look, we need to kind of get better at actually kind of convincing managers that hiring externally is a good idea. So that was one of our kind of strategic pillars. And beneath each of these pillars, there's a full-on kind of program of work and activity that kind of goes behind it, right? Differentiated hiring is an interesting one, because we really approached every single hiring campaign in exactly the same way. So we started off looking at kind of exec and leadership roles, all the way down to kind of early in career kind of graduate roles. We did the same process for all of them. We kind of went through the same assessment process, we went through the same advertising process, and it was exactly the same. And the challenge was that we knew that there were certain roles in the market which are always going to be harder to recruit for. So core tech roles, engineering, UI. We talked about UX and some of the front end development teams, some of the real core kind of low level development kind of skill sets. Global account directors, for example, solution architects for some of our cloud technologies. We knew we needed to focus differently on those kind of technologies and projects, and yet we weren't really giving them the sort of the kind of approach we wanted to. So we differentiated it, and we kind of categorized all of our roles. So everything from like a finance business partner through to an account executive, and we kind of classified it as either a pivotal role for us, a core role for us, or or other. So a pivotal role is a role that we see it as having exponential impact on our business. So, for example, if we were to hire the very best account director in FMCG, then the chances are they're going to have a potentially exponential impact on our bottom line selling into those FMCG companies. Whereas actually, and sorry if finance business partners, there's probably none in here anyway, so I can say what I like about them, doesn't really matter. Like, you could have a really, really strong, maybe the best in the world, FBC, but they're not going to have a massive impact on the overall kind of business. They're important to the business. They're a core role for us. But as an organisation, do they make that much kind of difference in terms of the top end? Probably not, right? So sourcing team, we tend to look at mostly at kind of the pivotal roles. So a lot of the engineering roles kind of sit within there. I've highlighted the ones in red are kind of more to do with this kind of talk. That's why they're red, basically, no other reason. Data-driven outcomes. So we kind of went to market. We did some recruitment activity, and at the end of it, the manager said, "Is this the best person you can find?" And we're like, "Yeah, probably. Pretty sure they are. I've done a lot of searching." And trying to influence in Microsoft is very, very difficult without kind of data. It's kind of almost like the kind of currency that you can use to influence people. So we kind of thought, well, we need to change that. So we need to start having a look at some of the things we can do to kind of quantify some of these markets that we're looking into. So the 3 examples I've got for you today kind of play an answer to that in a bit more detail. So I'll go into more detail about that. The other 2 foundational recruitment culture and scale and impact, they are important. So this is kind of how we look at, now, who is a recruiter at Microsoft? Is it the recruitment team? Traditionally it was a recruitment issue. If we can't hire anyone, recruitment gets a slap for it. If we're not hiring the right people, it's probably recruitment. In fact, most things ended up in kind of recruitment's problem, right? I don't know whether that kind of resonates with any of you guys. And yet we've now switched it around a bit to say, well, actually the hiring manager is just as important in this kind of process, because when a really good top talent kind of comes in for an interview, they're doing their due diligence on us as well. If we're not coming across as a great, diverse, inclusive organisation to kind of work for, great projects, energetic, having some kind of purpose behind us, then actually they're probably not going to want to come join us, even if we offered them. So that's kind of what that was about. And then scale and impact is around, as a GTA team, how can we scale what we do most effectively? So we had a big recruitment team in Norway, right? And it's like, well, hang on, Norway's a small subsidiary for us and the UK is a huge subsidiary for us. Why do we do that? So we centralise everything into kind of a European team, and that's where my sourcing team kind of comes in. And also the channels that we use, kind of underpinning all that. So the analysis piece is important because I talked about the influencing piece, empowering talent sources to have kind of more effective talent sourcing strategies, right? So we were fairly one-dimensional, so we might do kind of a bit of a search, come up with candidates, deliver a shortlist, and that was it. As if we were doing a search. A lot of the time we're just posting jobs and seeing kind of who kind of came in. What's the point of doing that? Well, we can be more. We're never going to know the market in its entirety because I think it's kind of almost impossible to map the entire market. But it kind of gives us some kind of directional data about where things are going. When we asked the kind of execs in the business sort of a year after kind of shifting into a much more kind of data-driven way of recruiting, they didn't say, and I didn't ask them by the way, but the TA director from Microsoft did, they didn't say the biggest impact the sourcing teams had is actually kind of filling all these jobs. They said the biggest impact we had is actually the ability to understand what's happening in the market, because it enables the business to make some quite interesting strategic decisions about not only where we hire or even should we hire, but actually what we're going to hire as well. So with some of this data that we produce, a lot of it competitor data actually kind of goes to quite senior levels within the organisation, and they look at it and go, okay, that's interesting. If Facebook are opening up another team here, what should we do about that? Where are we going to lose people as a result of that? Where's the retention risk going to come from next? What sort of top talent can we hire now to kind of counter some of these kind of moves the competition's making? And also kind of adding kind of context to the work that we do as a business. So you hear a lot about how do you, as a TA team, add value. So that was a buzzword for me like 10 years ago. The feedback from my manager was, well, you're doing a good job, Rick. You're filling jobs, but you need to add some value. And I really personally struggled with that. Like, what, isn't my job to fill jobs? Isn't that adding value to the company? And over the last few years, it's kind of become much more kind of apparent to me. And to Dan's point around our role as an advisor is a lot of them just don't know it. So they either don't know what's happening in the marketplaces, or they do know. And if they do know, kind of grasping that and getting them to help you out and harnessing those kind of those skills is really important. So I'd say even the ones that do kind of claim to know the markets, it's fairly limited and maybe out of date. So to give you an example, some of the recent joiners who's a manager, they might know the market better than maybe you do in that particular area. So harness that and get some insight from them and recent joiners. So we get a lot of insight from recent joiners. The role of a TA person in Microsoft, though, is probably to align managers' expectations in each of these 3 areas. So the manager typically has an idea about what they want to hire, right? Or they should do, otherwise you're really screwed. So they've got their own view about what they want to hire, so they give you a job spec. They may have written it might have come from HR 3,000 years ago. It may be relevant, may not be. And it typically focuses very much on the here and now, what they need to fill this particular gap today. As a TA person, though, we're also thinking about, well, okay, what's good for the company? What is that the right thing for the organisation? in years to come for future talent perspectives. And this isn't particularly representative in terms of, well, we just want to hire right in the middle here, but there's much more overlap between what the company wants and a hiring manager wants. But the point is, our role is to advise managers not only about what's good for them now, but also what's good for the organisation. And also, quite frankly, what the market can deliver. Because I've heard lots of examples today of where managers have said they want X, Y, and Z, and let's make them speak Dutch as well, just to make it harder. And the reality is, you can have these kind of conversations with managers like, do you realise that by adding that Dutch requirement language in there as well, your market's gone from being a huge funnel to this? So you can have that conversation, but one of the examples I'll show you is kind of how you kind of quantify that, okay? So the first type of market data, and there's only 3, you'll be glad to know, is called market kind of segmentation kind of data, and it's probably the highest level data that I'm going to talk about today. So we would typically kind of, let me skip on one. We would typically use this when we're kind of talking about, when we're right up front of a big hiring campaign. And there's lots of great tools here today to kind of help you get some of this data. This is manual stuff, typically designed in Excel. And we're using kind of PowerPoint to deliver it, but we're getting it from LinkedIn. I'm going to show you how it's going to get some of this kind of data. I'll tell you one of the benefits of doing that are in a minute as well. But it gives you kind of context of the overall kind of market. So one of the examples here, the Germany EAV, so that's an enterprise architecture view. So a manager is saying, look, I need to hire 10 enterprise architects in Germany. Talk to me about what the market kind of looks like, who the key players are. I've got an idea in my own mind, but let's kind of talk about from a location perspective, where the hot spots are for that kind of talent. So it gives you, very kind of, high level kind of context kind of data that you can use for those kind of discussions with managers. We've even done this kind of thing, which kind of gives you a view to managers where they may want to kind of put that kind of talent. So an example of this would be digital architecture. So we had 80 recs coming in from Microsoft Corp. Want to hire 80 digital architects, so like 100K, heavy hitting, senior architects to talk about kind of how organizations can use the cloud for their digital transformation kind of going forward. And they come to us saying in Europe, and this is the first time actually that I was aware of this, like a year ago, where should we hire them in Europe? It used to be they'd come to us and say, I want one there, that one there needs to speak Flemish, and I want 5 of those there, and they're very, very prescriptive. But since we've started kind of using data more, they kind of know our capability to actually kind of advise them. They come to us and say, look, we want to hire the best people. What do you recommend? If I really need a Dutch speaker, but is it really worth me going into Holland and trying to find one, or should I just try and find someone in the UK that will reload there because maybe Dutch isn't as important? So it's kind of kicking off those kind of conversations before a large kind of recruitment campaign. There's no Amazon people here, are they? But there's a nice overview of Amazon Web Services, and we will look at an organisation within a particular business unit, and we'll kind of dissect certain elements of information about where their talent kind of profile kind of sits, how we're going to compete against them, quite frankly, from a comp and Ben's perspective, and we'll kind of map out. So this is the example here in the bottom left. Probably can't see it, but you don't need to. It's around cloud solution architecture in Europe. So we went on a big campaign 2 years ago, and last year and this year, to hire cloud solution architects or CSAs. So the first thing we did is go, so right, what does our market look like? Where do we know a lot of these kind of talents exist? And how can we go into them, not only to hire some of the best talent, but disrupt those companies, quite frankly, as well, because they're doing it to us, right? And then finally, the recommendations. So this is a key point here is make sure, one of the things we learn is delivering the data to the business is one thing, but actually kind of coming back with recommendations on that is absolutely essential. So it isn't just a case of saying, like, here's all the problems, go figure it out. It's actually, here's what we're seeing, and here's some of the ideas we've got to kind of circumvent some of these kind of talent challenges. So how we're kind of putting together some of this stuff, LinkedIn Recruiter, and by the way, we also use, probably about, 20 or 30 other sources. LinkedIn Recruiter is kind of good for kind of giving you kind of a start for 10, but if it's tech talent, we'll be using other things like Stack Overflow, for example. So we, all of the other sources, I can see in your mind, you're thinking, oh, my people aren't even on LinkedIn, that's not that useful for me. It doesn't have to be LinkedIn. You can use any kind of, sourcing tools, but it just kind of gives you an idea. We find it's a good kind of starting point, really. And you can pull in the information here. So the examples I've got, the company they work for, their current job title. So what we do is put together a Boolean string that would be very specific to that kind of high level kind of market segment. So for an enterprise architect, we'd put in maybe 15, 20 very relevant sort of titles that could be pertaining to that kind of skill set, typical kind of search stuff. Plug it in there and then just let it kind of run through and see what kind of data you kind of get. Tend not to use the kind of LinkedIn, the new, you type in your job title and it kind of pops it into a box and then use the same thing again. Less accurate, right? So that's what we're finding is you just put Boolean in there, it's much more accurate. And then you export it into, we've built our own template to kind of give us that kind of consistent view. But the point here is that you can do this relatively quickly. So if it's someone with good Boolean skills and if you've understood the job properly and the requirements, you can do this in an afternoon. It doesn't take very long to do. So the next piece of data that we often deliver is around what we call deep diving or insights analysis data. So this is kind of it's a horrible American term, like a double click down on that almost to kind of the next level down. And the two examples I'll give you, again, I'm kind of picking on AWS here, but so this is kind of a typical kind of market map, right? So the business often comes to us and say, and this was in particular for our partner development unit mapping. So we started to hire a similar kind of partner unit that Amazon have got. And we've gone, okay, let's go and see what they do. Let's put together as much as we can about that organisation, and let's pull it all into one place. And it's deliberately blurry, by the way, so you can't see the names. And they've probably changed because this is out of date now. And we'll sit down with them and say, look, hey guys, this is how your structure is going to be looking like, and this is how Amazon's looking like. And this does take a little bit longer because it's a case of kind of using all the different sources, sometimes kind of calling candidates and saying, hey, interesting career, Microsoft, good. Who do you work for? Do you work for them? Great. And start doing a bit of kind of more typical kind of search and selection, kind of long list, kind of mapping type work. And we'll just put it together in some kind of easy to kind of digest information. But the example on the top right here is much, I love this example. This was SharePoint engineers in Bucharest. So the manager for a support engineering team has an ongoing requirement for hiring SharePoint engineers. And I met him in Bucharest, and he said to me, hey Rick, I don't understand why we're struggling so hard to find these people. Bucharest is a thriving market. I've got a report here from EY or Deloitte or someone like that saying there's 13,000 of them here, why can't you hire them? And I said, okay, well, tell me your top 5 employers and we'll kind of go to them and have a look at them in detail. So he kind of reeled off a few other companies there. I won't kind of say who they are, but they're competitors and or partners. And so I said, right, let's do some deep dives in terms of what those profiles actually look like. So the example here are, how many employees do they have in Bucharest? And we broke it down by each individual company, all up, how many there are. And by the way, he wants French speakers. They have to speak French because they're servicing the French market, make it a bit harder. How many of those actually speak French? So you just do, your Boolean, either, French language or a skill set of, French, obviously. And then how many technical profiles actually have French? So all of a sudden that kind of big number is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then exactly how many we've already contacted. So we can easily look through and reference when did we contact them last, and have they responded, for example. And it gives you that kind of bit at the bottom there. So and then you kind of break it down saying, all right, so of that original, however many there were, 20,000, all of a sudden you've got nearer, a really small number that actually are relevant, because look, a lot of them are sysadmins or they're networking specialists or something less relevant to what you actually see. So it's kind of helping kind of that kind of conversation with them in terms of, could you take a system admin and train them on the dev tools that you need to do this? Yes, no, why not? Okay, well, here's your pool. So it gives you that kind of level of detail that perhaps otherwise you wouldn't have had. And just moving on, probably my favorite is this kind of really easy funnel data. So if you've been in recruitment longer than 10 minutes, you've known as that kind of recruitment funnel. We will deliver that with managers. So the example I'll give you here is a services account executive in Denmark, right? So we start off with like, how many people are on LinkedIn in Denmark? That many, right? And then the next circle down, how many would say they're in sales and or IT software sales? And then you literally kind of quantify in each different circle the numbers. And you could put loads and loads of circles in here. How many are located within the Sealand kind of area in Denmark? And that's there's only 1,200 of that original 2 million basically. And you keep quantifying it down. How many have got professional services and or kind of consulting experience within Microsoft technologies? 280. So your perception as a manager of like, there's loads in the market. I've seen thousands of them. All of a sudden, it's starting making more sense, because we're saying, well, there's only 280, so we're going to go out to those 280 and have conversations with them. So it's really easy to do, but it's quite effective. I'm going to skip through that. So we do a bit on Yammer in terms of it's a tool that we've got, like a kind of Facebook or LinkedIn. It's an internal kind of social network. It's about how we share information. So one of the things I would say we've learned is actually you're doing all these kind of market maps and data deliveries. Try and pool it somewhere and share it, because you can learn a lot from what everyone else is doing. If your team's big, it's kind of good to do that. And I'll just kind of finish on some 5 things that I would kind of call out as top things. So I mentioned before, always provide recommendations. So we started delivering data and we left the business to make their own conclusions. Didn't work that well. So the more kind of prescriptive you are in terms of your ideas, get that conversation going, the better, I'd say. Choose when and what data carefully to deliver. So in particular, you don't want to do this for all roles because you can't. It's quite labor intensive. And also, you've got to get the buy-in from the business that they actually care about this stuff, because if you're going to have these conversations with a very closed mindset kind of stakeholder group, you're probably wasting your time. So I'd say, try it out with the manager that you get some good traction with, get some good case studies from them, and then, expand it out. That's what I'd say. Directional data, I love the term directional. Someone says to me, LinkedIn, not everyone's on LinkedIn. No, they're not. They're true. And by the way, they probably won't all appear in my search. My search isn't perfect. Gives you some direction, though. It's better than having nothing, basically. You've got to kind of go in and be ready to have a conflictual kind of conversation with a manager or whoever is saying, I hear what you're saying, this is what I'm seeing. If what you actually, if you feel so differently about it, let's look at my search terms. What other kind of profiles can I look at? It starts that kind of conversation that kind of gets managers thinking more tactically about their recruitment, which is definitely helping. And also the final point is using data in a positive way. So we started doing this, and some of the sources are kind of using it as a way of justifying the fact they've failed. It's not about that. It's about kind of figuring out ways and solutions to fix some of the talent hiring problems we've got, as opposed to just saying, hey, look, I can't find you anyone, here's why. It's like, okay, here's why, but here's what I can do. So I think that's probably the most important point, actually. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks.